This content carried in here is suitable for general family viewing.
Good morning, viewers of KU TV. Welcome today for another session. The second session of today and a session for Eastern government. Today, we are going to look at Form 4 work. We're giving a priority to the candidates. And the topic under discussion today is public revenue and expenditure. One of the most interesting topics covered in Form 4. The topic is public revenue and expenditure. Just 20 seconds. I want to believe that all the learners are tuned at home, and in the best interest of time, I'll do less of the writing because of time, so that we're able to cover this topic within the stipulated time given. So I will begin by giving a definition of some terminologies which are normally used in this topic, and one of it is I want us to get to understand what is the meaning of revenue and also what is the meaning of expenditure, meaning now, when we talk of revenue, these are funds raised by the government from different sources with an intention to spend or to use it. These are funds raised by the government from different sources with the aim of making use of these funds. We shall be expounding later on those different sources. So funds raised by the government from different sources with an intention of using it. Funds raised by the government from different sources with the aim of using it. Then also we have what is expenditure, and this is the use of revenue raised by the government. So the use of revenue raised by the government. So the use of the revenue, which already we've mentioned, raised by the government, is what we term as expenditure. Now, sourcing of funds and spending is done according to a well-agreed plan called a budget. That the sourcing of the funds by the government is normally the sourcing of funds and spending, sourcing and how it's going to be used is normally done according to a well-agreed plan called a budget, which is normally done by the government and of course under the Ministry of Finance, or you can as well call it Treasury. So that is why we want now to look at what is a national budget. Given that I have mentioned a budget as a well-agreed plan before funds are sourced and used, we want now to look at what is a national budget. National budget. So to define a national budget, it is a comprehensive statement that gives an estimate of public revenue and expenditure and fiscal plans for a given fiscal year. It basically means a comprehensive statement that gives an estimate of public revenue and expenditure and fiscal plans of a given fiscal year. Financial plans of a given fiscal year. When I talk of a fiscal year, I basically mean an accounting year. The entire accounting done in that year with the funds that was raised. So it means a comprehensive statement that includes everything that is supposed to be included as far as sourcing of revenue and spending is concerned, that gives an estimate, not exact, but an estimate of public revenue, the revenue raised by the government, and expenditure and financial plans for a given fiscal year. And that is a financial year, which normally runs from the 1st of July to 30th of June in a given year. So that is a financial year runs from the 1st of July to the 30th of June. That is according to the government. But if you're running a business, your financial year could be starting from the 1st of February to 31st of January the following year. But it all means the same because actually it amounts to a whole year. Now, a national budget is normally presented to Parliament by the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Treasury. That is in June. We are likely to have, not we are likely, but we are going to have in the next month. So it is the Minister for Finance. Today we don't call them ministers, but we are calling them Cabinet Secretaries in charge of Treasury or in charge of Finance. Now the financial year, as I've mentioned, starts from the 1st of July and it ends on the 30th of June each year. So the financial year for the year 2019-2020 is going to end 30th of June, and the financial year 2020-2021 will be starting next that is 1st of July. Now, having given that explanation about what is a national budget as a comprehensive statement that has an estimate of what the government, how the government intends to raise the revenue and how it's going to spend in a given financial year, we want to see how important is this national budget to a government. One, it helps the country or the county to set its priorities first to avoid mismanagement. Remember, since the year 2010, we have two levels of government in this country. That is the national government and the county government. So when we are discussing a national budget, we look at the national budget at the national level, where also the law allows the county government also to have their annual budget at their respective counties. So whereas the national government under the Ministry for Finance with the Treasury Minister or Cabinet Secretary giving us the national budget, also those in charge of finance at county level, or the ministers in charge of finance at county level, they will also be giving their annual budget. So one, it helps the county and the country to set its priorities first to avoid mismanagement, so that you have what comes first. Number two, another importance of a national budget, it spells out in detail the source of revenue. So it spells out in detail the source of revenue, where the government is going to get these sources. Where the government is going to get these sources. So having seen at priorities, number two, it actually spells out in details the source of revenue, where the government got the money, how the government is going to raise the money. Number three, it indicates goods and services that may be exempted from tax. And this is meant to cushion the citizens in that particular country. Remember, the issue of an annual budget is basically something that is done worldwide, just the way we'll be looking at tax. And every government on earth tax its citizen. So it indicates goods and services that may be exempted from tax, because when we bring on board tax on goods, definitely the price is going, the prices for various goods and perhaps services is also going to change. And therefore, it may clearly show which goods are supposed to be taxed and which ones are not supposed to be taxed. Point number 4, it clearly shows expenditure allocated to various projects and services. A national budget, as a comprehensive statement, will always clearly shows expenditure allocated to various projects. Expenditure allocated, expenditure allocated, expenditure allocated to various projects, so that it is known that this amount of money is meant to be used for this particular project. Number 5, it serves as the basis by which financial monitoring can be done by different interested groups. How are we going to monitor financial finances, how the government has been using money, how it has been the money? So for us, for perhaps maybe to bring on board international donors like IMF, who may have given our country, for example, Kenya, money, and if at all, if money has been, or funds have been misappropriated, therefore it lays the basis on which monitoring of finances or funds can be done by interested groups. A very good example, looking at the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Anti-Corruption Commission, among others. Number 6, it also helps to differentiate between capital and recurrent expenditure. Through the budget, we're able to tell what is the capital expenditure by how much and what is recurrent expenditure, where we are going to spend money as we spent last year on the recurrent services, and whether we're also going to spend money on new projects, so that we're able to tell the difference between capital expenditure and recurrent expenditures. We're going to look at it at a later stage. Then number 7, it helps to distribute expenditure needs equitably. It helps to distribute expenditure needs equitably. That is not equal, but equitably. There's a difference between equitably and equal. That is, perhaps you may find there is a ministry which is not in need as another ministry, and that is why you will find that ministries will always get a different allocation of funds. Whereas the Ministry of Education is getting 200 billion, you will find the ministry, for example, for water and irrigation is perhaps getting 60 billion or 80 billion. So that is, the ministries are normally allocated funds depending on their needs. And that's why we are saying it helps to distribute expenditure needs equitably. Then it helps both levels of government to give fiscal policies that guides their operations. Both national government and county government, they will use the budget to give fiscal policies that come with how funds can be spent or how funds can be used, so that it can guide the operations when they are working, when they're using the funds, when they're working on projects and so forth and so on, so that the operation can be done properly. So it guides them by using the budget. And then the last point, or the last importance of a national budget, it provides an opportunity to explain the inflation trends by the government and how to go about it. So the government will use the budget, the government will use the national budget as an opportunity to explain the inflation trends. Now, an inflation is a situation whereby we have more money in circulation or more money in the hands of individuals. And we are saying that it provides an opportunity to explain the inflation trends by the government and how to go about it and how the government can go about it. For example, how can the government now, using that budget, and they're looking at the inflation rate in our country, how can the government go about it? How can the government reduce the inflation rate so that it can come low? And that is when sometimes you see now the government brings on board treasury bills and what? And bonds. Treasury bills, and as well as what? And bonds. Where treasury bills, the government is like they're buying your money, and they're buying your money and at a discount, so that perhaps if you have 10,000, they buy it at 970, but they'll return it at 1,000, so that you earn something small. But they'll be moving money from the hands of the people. But if it's actually a treasury bond, that one they buy your money, but they will return your money with an interest, but after a very long period of time, because treasury bills can be, within 3 months, within 6 months, and so forth and so on. Those who've done accounts can explain better than I have done. Now, let's move and look at sources of public revenue. Sources of public revenue. Sources. Where does this money come from? Where does these funds come from? Sources of public revenue. Revenue. Right. Sources of public revenue. And revenue raised nationally is shared equitably by the national and the county government. Equitably. Not equal. Equitably. So that perhaps if a given county is more developed and another county is less developed, then the less developed will be given more money and the more developed will be given less funds, so that now the less developed can also come up in terms of development. Now, the revenue collected is normally deposited in various funds as per its use. That when the government collects money, when it collects revenue, or when it collects fund, this money is normally deposited in different funds or different accounts, different funds or accounts as per use. That is, they raise revenue and they're keeping this revenue depending on how this fund is going to be used. One is what you call equalization fund. One is equalization fund. I hope the candidates, we are moving together. Equalization funds. Pay attention so that I can expound on that. Now, equalization funds, it keeps 50% of all revenue collected annually used to provide basic services. That when the government raises revenue from different sources, 50% of what has been collected is normally kept in the equalization fund. And this fund is it normally keeps money that normally provides basic services. Basic services. For example, health, that's a basic service in a country, payment of salaries, for civil servants and so forth. Then also we have consolidated fund. B, consolidated fund. That's another account or another fund which money raised by the government is kept. And this one, it keeps all the monies raised and received by the national government. All the monies raised and received. It can receive in form of an aid, in form of a loan, in form of a grant. And what it has also raised, it's normally kept in the consolidated fund. Then we have contingencies fund. Contingencies fund, that is another account. Contingencies fund. Yes. And this account or this fund, it keeps monies meant for emergencies. But it's normally done with approval by the finance secretary or the treasury secretary, the treasury cabinet secretary or the finance cabinet secretary. Once the treasury secretary is convinced that there is need for an emergency funds to be released, then he can authorize from this fund. And then the final fund is revenue account or revenue fund. Revenue fund or account. Don't worry about my handwriting. Listen carefully. Now, revenue fund, it is the account on which money raised and received from counties is kept. Remember, we have two levels of government. The national government and the county government. So when the national government is raising revenue, even the county government also raises revenues on their own. So when they raise this revenue, when this revenue is coming from the county government to the national government, now what the national government does is keeps these funds in the revenue fund. Now, all these funds we've mentioned, especially the equalization fund, the consolidated fund, and the revenue fund, apart from the contingencies fund, it is only the contingencies fund that money can be withdrawn with the express authority of the Treasury Secretary. Otherwise, the rest of the funds, these funds can only be withdrawn. Withdrawal can only be done after it has been approved by the controller of budget, a senior official in the government who can authorize the withdrawal of government money. That is called the controller of budget. Now, we want to move on and look at sources of revenue for national government. Now, we come to the real sources themselves. And these sources for the national government first before we look at the sources for the county government. Remember, there are two levels of government. So we are looking at the national government and the county government. So sources of revenue for national government. And one is domestic. Domestic, and number two is external. Domestic is also known internal. And external is also known as foreign. Foreign sources. So domestic sources or internal sources. Then we have external sources or foreign what? Sources. So let us begin by looking at domestic revenue. Now, under domestic revenue, the main source of domestic revenue is tax. That is the main. Although there are other sources, but the main source, I can say 90% of domestic revenue is what? Tax. The main source is tax. The main source for domestic revenue is tax. And therefore, what is this tax we are talking about? What is tax? Now, tax, I know you can find out from different sources, whether it is, you can Google, you can find from the dictionary, but as long as the meaning is at home. Tax is normally is a levy which is normally imposed by the government on individuals and entities to raise revenue so that it can run its operation. It is a levy, and actually it's a compulsory levy. It's a compulsory levy that is normally imposed by the government on individuals or its citizens and entities so that it could raise revenue to spend. Now, again, we want to look at different types of tax. This tax, we have two types of tax. One, we have direct tax, and we have indirect. Those are English words. Indirect tax and direct what? Tax. So let us look at direct tax. What is this direct tax? So under domestic revenue, we have seen tax now, direct tax and indirect what? So let us look at direct tax. Now, under direct tax, it is money levied directly on the taxpayer's income. Money levied directly on the taxpayer's income. On the taxpayer's income. Although it's a bracket. So basically, most people who work in this country and they happen to be earning, I think, above 12,000, they normally pay tax. And this is directly. So it is money which is normally levied on individual's taxpayer, individual's income or a taxpayer's income. So let us look at these different types of what? Direct what tax. One is income tax. Types. We We have types here. Income tax. Now, income tax is an example of direct what? Tax. It is tax levied on individuals' income, i.e. monthly salaries. On individuals' income, monthly salaries. Sometimes you are normally given a leave pay. You're going to have a leave of maybe 42 days. So, it is normally levied on individuals' income, i.e. monthly salaries, levies, bonuses, among others. And the deduction is normally known as pay as you earn. In short, normally call it PAYE or payee. Pay as you earn, because they deduct it from your salary directly. Then also we have what you call corporate tax, corporation tax, corporation tax. Corporation tax. As another good example of direct tax. This is tax levied on profits made by corporations, or rather by companies. Any company, when it makes a profit, there is tax levied on the profit. If that company is working within the country, it's 30%. If it's let's say it's an international company, or it has a branch here, but it operates from outside, the percentage is slightly above. It could be about 37.5% as per the law. Then also we have what you call capital gains. Capital gains. Now, under capital gains, we are saying that capital gains tax levied on profits obtained from the sale of land and machinery. Perhaps maybe you are importing vehicles, you have sold land. Any profit you make, you pay tax to the government, which is normally known as capital. It is normally called capital gain. Now, let's move on and look at indirect tax. Very quickly, we look at indirect tax. And we are told that indirect tax, it is tax levied on goods and services, but with parliament approval. It's levied on goods and services with parliament approval. It is not implicated directly, but the burden is normally passed or goes to another party. Because when you're going to buy a loaf of bread, the cost of production is perhaps maybe 20 shillings, but you're buying it at 50 shillings. So there is tax involved in, but you're paying that tax indirectly. So some of the examples of indirect tax, one is custom duties. One examples of indirect tax. We have custom duties. Now, under custom duties, we are saying that tax on imported goods, all imported goods, they normally pay tax, we call custom duties. Then we also have excise duty. Excise duty. This is tax that is normally paid by all goods manufactured from within the country. Then export duty. This is a form of tax that is normally paid on goods which are actually meant for export, exported from Kenya to other countries. For example, whatever you're taking to China, and maybe we're taking to America or England, Britain, France, Netherlands, Germany, mention all those countries. Then we have another example of indirect tax known as VAT in full, which means value added tax. Tax levied on goods. The consumers gets the burden. And this tax normally determines the prices of goods, because the higher the VAT, the higher the prices of what? Various commodities. So this one you'll essentially find it almost on essential goods. Then also we have traffic revenue tax. Tax levied on traffic services like driving licenses, road levy, TLB, mention them as far as the traffic laws are concerned. Then also we have investment revenue. Investment revenue. Now, on investment revenue, are funds from government parastatals and government profit-making institutions. If the government has parastatals, for example, we have a government parastatal like Kenya Ports Authority, that's a government parastatal. If it makes a profit, Kenya Meat Commission, if it makes a profit, then that profit is also normally taxed, and that is what we are calling investment revenue. If they make any profit, Then also there's trading licenses, money paid by the people who perhaps want to run businesses, for them to acquire licenses, permits to run businesses in form of trading licenses. Is a form of indirect tax that government normally gets. Then also we have loan interest receipts. Loan interest receipts. Government gets money from organizations and parastatals from the money it makes, especially if they make also a profit. Perhaps maybe they had made some investments and they make some profits. So loan interest receipts. Then, and a very good example here is we have Kenya Power and Lighting Company, the Central Bank of Kenya. When they make those profits, you will see the government demanding tax on the same. Then also we have what you call land rates. Now land rates are money levied or paid by citizens and companies. So sometimes we have good companies, and also we have individuals who own land. They pay some levy to the government. Then we have house rates as well, revenue money from government buildings. If the government perhaps owns building, we have very many buildings owned by the government. For example, KICC. Is it KICC? Yes. Also we have the insurance plaza. That is a government building, and others. They raise money, they let those spaces and get money. So that money also earns the government revenue. Then we have fees, perhaps maybe charged on timber, fuel, and mining. Fees, companies mining, there are companies, the millers, those who are doing logging, cutting of timbers, and so forth and so on. They also pay some revenue to the government. Now, also we have court fines. These are fines slapped on persons found guilty in courts. That is another source of revenue. If you've been convicted by a court of law and perhaps maybe you're supposed to pay a fine, maybe you're jailed, that one becomes another source of revenue for the government. We have also tourism fees. Government raises funds from local and foreign tourists when you visit national parks and so forth. What the government earns from that acts also as a source of what? As a source of revenue. We have motor vehicle licenses, the liquor licenses, loan repayment. So loan repayment, here the government gets money remitted by county government on loans given to them. Like the county government borrowed money from the national government. When they remit back the money, the interest becomes a source of revenue for the government. Those who want to run liquor businesses like selling wines and spirits, they also pay for licenses. The motor vehicle licenses, the driving licenses, they also pay. Now, and then also finally there is what you call service fees, where the government gets money from the provision of services like the sewerage service, the water service, and if possible, garbage collection. Although that one is normally given to private entities to run that. But sewage services, the water companies, when you pay for those services, it acts as a source of revenue for the national government. Now, it should be noted that all taxes in Kenya are collected by the Kenya Revenue Authority, Kenya Revenue Authority, based at Times Towers, the sole body in Kenya that is charged with the responsibility of collecting revenue. So let us look at external sources. We have been looking at the domestic sources or internal sources, and let us look at the external sources. That is where the government, national government, raises money from outside. And these sources, the government also gets money from foreign nations and private organizations in form of either it can be grant, it can get money in form of grant, it can get money in form of loan, it can get money in form of an aid from different organizations, private institutions, and so forth. If it's a grant, it means you are given the money but you will pay without an interest. If it's a loan, you pay with an interest. If it's an aid, you are just given for free, like China has been doing to African countries, trapping them, giving them money, an aid for free. They give you a grant of 100 billion, you pay back 100 billion without an interest. But if it's a loan, it must have an interest. Then there are two types of external sources. One is bilateral aid, and two, or B, multilateral aid. These are two types of external sources. Bilateral aid is where two friendly countries assist each other. For example, Kenya and China, Kenya and Japan. We have like the JICA, the Japanese International Corporation, Kenya and China, Kenya and USA, Kenya and France. But when you talk about a multilateral aid, it involves many countries who form a trading bloc. A trading bloc, like for example, International Monetary Fund, IMF, World Bank, European Union, African Development Bank. This one serves as multilateral aid because it's actually, it brings together many countries who form a trading bloc or global institutions that is normally meant to give funds to especially developing nations. Now, sources of revenue for county government. Now, county government, just like the national government, they also have their sources of revenue for county government. They get money from different sources, and of course, sources for county government. Now, rates and rents on properties are buildings. If they own there are buildings within that particular county, the owners pay rates and rents. There's also 15% of national budget shared amongst all the counties. The entire budget, 15% is usually allocated to the counties as per the Constitution of Kenya 2010. 15% of the entire budget is normally allocated to all 47 counties in Kenya, with Nairobi being the largest in terms of getting allocation and Lamu the least. Then tax on services like water, sewage services, and even parking. So parking, you pay, that money goes, is a source of income for the county government. There is sewage services, there is also water services. Then also there is tax on entertainment. For example, maybe those who run theaters within that particular county, that one acts as a source of revenue for the county government. Then loans are from capital markets. They can also get loans from the capital markets, for example, like the Nairobi Stock Exchange. They can also borrow money. Then also there is grants from local and international institutions or external institutions. That is talking about grants. And grants, you are given funds which you will pay back without an interest. So it can get from even from within the country or from outside the country, depending on the leadership of that county. If the governor is smart enough and is able to secure these grants from outside the country, well and good. That will be good. That will be a plus for that particular county. Then money raised from any investment. For example, the other counties running even transport services. Whichever investment that particular county has invested in, it can raise revenue, which it can use it later on. Then fines on lawbreakers. Especially remember, county government, they normally have bylaws because they work under the national government. So the laws they normally make within their counties and county assemblies, they are normally called bylaws. For example, within Nairobi County, sometimes there was a time when you are walking, you cannot speed all over. You cannot walk very fast. You will be arrested because you know that is now inconveniencing others because you are walking and hitting people. So you are going to be arrested and arraigned in their court, and you'll be charged by actually disobeying their bylaws. Or perhaps sometimes you're doing something which is weird, which is against the law. Then selling of its property. For example, county government can sell land. A very good example is Narok County. It has large tracts of land. If it chooses to sell, perhaps maybe an institution wants to put up a campus, maybe University of Nairobi in Narok, fine. They sell and earn some income. Then sales fees from farmers or farm produce within the locality. That one also acts as a source of revenue for the counties, apart from the main one, which is 15%, which is also coming from the national government. So let us look at how both the national government and the county government spends money, expenditure, how both the national government and the county government expenditure spends money. And of course, we said the funds raised is normally used by the national government and the county government. So when they're using these funds, they're basically doing what we're calling what? Spending or expenditure. Now, there are three main types of expenditure here. There may be two, but there are three. One is capital expenditure, then recurrent expenditure, and three, supplementary, to supplementary expenditure. Now, briefly, let me just go through what is meant by this expenditure. Now, a capital expenditure is also known as development expenditure, and this is where the national government spends money on major projects or development projects, major projects. And capital expenditure normally occurs once in a while. That project, you cannot invest in constructing 5 roads this year, again next year 5 roads, the other year 5 roads. It can take place within a span of maybe 5-10 years. So there are major projects like constructing of roads. So capital expenditure, development expenditure normally is where government spends money on such major project once in a while. And if it's going to happen next year, it will be different from what was done this year. And that's why I was giving an example like the development of roads, building of stadiums, among others. For example, building of an international airport. You cannot build every year, once in a while, because it's a major project and it's going to require a lot of funds to fund it. Then we have the recurrent expenditure. This is government expenditure that normally keeps on reoccurring each and every year. For example, purchasing of drugs in hospitals, it keeps on taking place each and every year. Paying of civil servants, salaries of civil servants. The government keeps on paying money each and every month. That is a recurrent expenditure. There is no way the government can abdicate its duties from that. It has to keep on paying the salaries, buying drugs, so forth and so on. So expenditure on salaries. We also have subscriptions. For example, maybe the government is a member of OAU, or rather AU, a member of UN, a member of Commonwealth, a member of COMESA. There's some subscription that has to be paid either annually or monthly. So you find if it's annually, the government keeps on paying that one. It's recurring because it happens each and every month. Then also, even to maintain embassies. Our embassies abroad, how are we going to maintain them? Because those working, the staffs in those embassies need to be paid. So the salaries is monthly. So that is a recurrent expenditure. Also, the government gives grants and bursaries to institutions, grants to county governments, and bursaries to institutions, learning institutions like universities, colleges, and so forth. So that is something that takes place each and every year. That one becomes a recurrent expenditure. For example, we owe China a lot of money, debt serving. We keep on paying it's every month. We service the loan, we service the debt that we owe different developed countries like China, because China is the leading, USA, France, Germany, Britain, among others. And then let's look at supplementary expenditure. Supplementary expenditure comes in to supplement what initially had been allocated. And a supplementary expenditure comes through what we call a supplementary estimate bill. A supplementary estimate bill, which is normally introduced in Parliament by the ministry concerned. That is, you are seeking for more funds to meet the deficit that you have experienced. If the Minister of Education was given 100 billion, and before the financial year elapses, it has already spent 100 and it requires more than 20 billion. For example, a very good example is the Ministry of Health currently. It has spent more money than it had budgeted because of the COVID-19, because it was unforeseen situation. And therefore, the government has to hurry, the ministry has to seek more funds from the treasury so that it can cushion the deficit that is there. Definitely, the Ministry of Health is going to spend more money than it had expected. Now, that one becomes a supplementary budget. It normally comes in due to unforeseen circumstances where you need more money to spend in your ministry, and therefore you seek that money from Treasury. And once you're given, it is called a supplementary expenditure. What about the county government? Even the county government also have the two types of expenditure: capital expenditure and recurrent expenditure. And of course, money meant, or money used to spend on development projects in the county, that is capital what? Expenditure. If a county government, for example, a county government of Kakamega is building Bohongo Stadium, that one becomes a capital expenditure. If a county government of Meru is building Kinoru Stadium, then that one becomes a capital expenditure. If the county government of Nairobi is building City Stadium, then that one becomes a capital what? Expenditure. But still, the county government also, they normally have recurrent expenditures because they have to pay their staffs, the salaries of the people working for the county government, the repairs. You're talking about the loan servicing. For example, the county government of Meru or the county government of Isiolo had borrowed money from the national government, 10 billion. So it keeps on reservicing that loan. If the county government also is doing some repairs, you know, repairs, today you're repairing this, tomorrow you're repairing something different. It keeps on reoccurring. That is, repairs keeps on reoccurring. Then also, it could be also the county government is also paying money to different, or rather it's contributing to some organizations. Now, having looked at that, as we are coming up to an end, moving towards the end, I just want to summarize by looking at the management of public revenue, how the money we are raising is normally managed, how the money we've raised, how this fund is normally managed. Once a budget has been done, once this money has been allocated to various ministries, to various government departments, to various institutions, how is this money normally managed? And a proper way of doing this one is national budget prepared by the Ministry of Finance and presented in Parliament for approval. So it has to be prepared and presented for approval. Number two, parliamentary committees. We have Parliamentary Accounts Committee and Parliamentary Investment Committee. These are powerful parliamentary committees that normally checks on how public revenue and expenditure is done. With Public Accounts Committee scrutinizing and presenting reports to Parliament, while the Public Investment Committee ensuring that public finances is used properly, that there is no misuse. And that is where the CS finance is normally summoned by these powerful committees so that they can appear before these committees. We have one chaired by, I think is Opio and I, the MP for Ugenya. Is it Ugenya? Ugenya, yes. A very powerful committee in Parliament. Then also we have auditing of public expenditure by the Auditor General. This office normally audits all government expenditures, where money has been given and how it has been used, so that there is justification that money was used properly. There is also a Parliament or other institutions. It okays the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission to investigate and recommend prosecution of individuals or cases of corruption within the government institutions. Where money has been misused, the Parliament or the Constitution has allowed the Kenya Anti-Corruption Commission to carry out investigation and recommend prosecution for such individuals. There is also internal audit unit, which is within each ministry. Every ministry does that, and this report is normally presented to Parliament just to make sure there is in-house check where funds are properly used within the ministry, and therefore the ministry will present its report to Parliament so that Parliament can be sure through the watchdog committees like the PAC and the PIC, that is the Public Investment and Public Accounts Committee, have to be sure that public revenue is being used properly. And then the control on tendering system to reduce irregular financial deals, that any services being offered to government institutions, all those services must be done through a tendering system so that the highest bidder is given an opportunity to offer that particular that particular services. As I just come out, I finish, it will be useful to mention these two individuals. One is the controller of budget, and the other one is the Auditor General. They are two individuals who actually possess same qualifications. For one to fit in these offices, the control of budget, the one authorizing any withdrawal of government money from the consolidated fund, from the revenue fund, from the equalization fund. This is a very powerful individual who actually must have done some financial, who must be having some financial knowledge, and also has dealt with public finances for over 10 years for one to be given that particular responsibility. And this person normally oversees implementation of a budget, the national budget. The controller normally oversees that and authorizes withdrawal of money and gives report to Parliament on how government money has been withdrawn and also how it has been used. That is the controller of budget. The one that was headed by Agnes Adhiambo, who retired recently. Then we have Auditor General, another very powerful person, another very important institution within the government. And the qualification for one to be an Auditor General is the same as the qualification for the controller of budget. And of course must have dealt with public finance for over 10 years. And his main responsibility will be to ensure that he audits both local, both levels of accounts, that is the county government and the national government. Then also auditing of accounts of commissions and independent bodies like IEBC, commissions, we have the Ombudsman, KNHCR, we have got commissions and independent bodies. So the accounts, because they fall under the government or they get government funding, they are normally audited by the Auditor General. And then also accounts of political parties, because nowadays they are normally funded by the exchequer, they are normally funded by the taxpayers, and therefore it's going to be audited by the Auditor General. Then also we have the public debt, what Kenyan has in terms of borrowing. If we have borrowed 100 billion, he has actually to audit. If we are given 100 billion, how did we use the money and how much have we paid back? Then finally, accounts of anybody as the law requires, whichever organization or institutions that the law may require that the auditing be done, then the Auditor General will do that particular work. The retired Auditor General is Samuel Ouko, who retired recently, and we're in the process of filling that position in due course. And finally, the Commission for Revenue Allocation, which is also discussed under this, the Commission for Revenue Allocation. It is a commission which is established under Article 215 of the Kenyan Constitution, that is Constitution of Kenya 2010, and it has a chairperson, two individuals nominated by political parties in the National Assembly, and 5 individuals nominated by political parties in the Senate. And then we have the PS from the Treasury or the Finance Ministry. The function of this very noble commission is making recommendations on the equitable sharing of resources, how national resources, national cake can be shared, then making recommendations on financial matters and management to county governments and national governments, then defining and enhancing revenue resources to national and county government on how these both levels of government are going to raise revenues, then encourage accountability of finances through proper financial procedures so that any dealings with finance is done as per the procedures that are required. Then as I finalize, coming up with ways of identifying marginalized areas so that when we are sharing resources, such areas are captured and they are also allocated more funds to enable them develop just like other developed regions. And the last point, it's recommendations on revenue allocation has to be submitted to the Senate or the National Assembly so that it can be approved. The Revenue Allocation Commission has to prepare its recommendations, but this recommendation must go through the National Executive Committee, the National Assembly, the Senate, the County Executive Committee, so that it can be approved, because it touches on both levels of government and all of them are interested parties. And that brings us to the end of our discussion today. For the candidates, please take note of the following questions which are likely to be tested under this particular topic. One is you can be asked to explain how public revenue is managed. Explain how public revenue is managed. Number two, you can also be asked to explain sources of revenue for the national government or sources of revenue for the county government. You can also be asked to explain how the national government spends its revenue. Likewise, you can also be asked to explain how the county government spends its revenue. These are quite related questions, and you ought to take note of them. And finally, they can also ask you to mention two functions of the Auditor General or two functions of the Control of Budget, or mention three functions of the Commission for Revenue Allocation. Take note, this is a very interesting topic, and I'm very sure if you are very keen at home and you also peruse and go through, check on the notes given by your teachers, I'm very much sure that you have gained something and you're not likely to be challenged by any question that may be tested on this particular topic. Until another time, kindly stay safe at home and make sure that you keep social distance, and always remember to sanitize. See you then.